And welcome everyone to another Maryland Terrapins recap. We'll just start with the lead. Tell the two halves, Maryland's 84-62 win over George Mason. George Mason came into this game 4-1, losing their opener on the road at Temple 94-85. Since then, they've won their last four consecutive games. That's wins over JMU, Florida A&M, Georgetown, and Florida Gulf Coast. Zahira Walton leading the way at 19.6 a contest and 8.8 rebounds. Kennedy Harris helping Walton along the way, adding 13 points through 13 points a game through those five contests. Maryland came into this one undefeated after beating Bethune-Cookman 95-49 to remain undefeated. George Mason got off to a strong start, leading Maryland at the end of a tough first quarter. But the game was tied at 36 at the half. The aforementioned Zahira Walton scored 17 points in the first half for the Patriots. Sailor Poffenbarger would hit a runner as time expired at the half to get Maryland even with George Mason at 36. So as bad as everything was going for Maryland, credit to George Mason for the outstanding half of basketball they played. They dictated the terms in which this game was going to be played. Walton didn't face much resistance, and since she didn't, she gave Maryland problems the entire first half. Maryland would respond immediately to start the second half, going on a 13-3 run, the first seven of which were unanswered. They would take a 68-53 lead into the final period. The Patriots kept coming, unbothered by the run that Maryland made in the third, looking to replicate that success, but on their terms in the fourth, getting off to a fast start, forcing a turnover, and knocking down a jumper to get things going. Things would go back and forth for a little bit. Then the Terps would use a 10-0 run later in the period to kind of provide that finishing kick and allow them to pull away late for the 84-62 victory. George Mason was led by Walton's 27 points and 2 steals. Kennedy Harris added 11 points, 5 rebounds, and a steal. Maria Moateng had 9 points and 5 assists. Maryland was led by Lucci Akanowa's 23 points, 4 boards, and 5 assists. She also had 3 steals in her effort. Yarden Garzon narrowly missed a double-double with 16 points and 9 rebounds. Addie Mack added 12 points and a steal. Poffenbarger, as we mentioned earlier, was super active, as impactful as always. 6 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 steals. So that's a hell of a line there from her. In the post game, George Mason's head coach, Coach Vanessa Blair Lewis, had this to say. I talked about our team in that first half. Just we were ready for this game. Tonight, our girls have been excited about playing top-tier teams, and Maryland is definitely that. I don't think that we put 40 minutes together tonight, but I'm proud we're a group. And that's true. While they didn't have a great second half, that first 20 minutes was outstanding for Mason. You guys see on the screen as Sailor hit that runner to close out the half to bring Maryland even. But I agree with their coach. That first 20 minutes was amazing, and they weren't scared to be in the building or shook in any shape, fashion, or form. I think Maryland went out to George Mason last year. This year, Mason came into the building. Their coach even went on to say, mention this is not the first time that a coach of a local team that Maryland's faced in the non-conference portion of the schedule mentioned how open Brenda is to having these games with other teams in the area and how it benefits the area as a whole and showcases the DMV area for the hotbed of talent that it is. Walton had this to say. We had good movement in the defense and got the defense moving as far as the difference between the first and second half. She mentioned the second half we got in our own way on Maryland's adjustments. I missed one quote from their head coach about that third quarter. We let that third quarter balloon, and that's tough to come back from. And that's exactly what we saw in the building earlier today. Maryland, Coach Freeze had this to say: I love the regroup we had at halftime. I love the response. And clearly the message resonated, and got through well. I thought these two were incredible at the podium today with her post game were Mira McLean and Aluchi Akanawa. Aluchi talked about how their shots weren't falling, and she said our shots aren't falling. We'll go find it in other ways. So about how all 23 of her points, nothing came from beyond the line, beyond the arc in this one. And that's true. They did a great job getting downhill and making Mason pay. Bear was asked about her stepping up today, just coming in and being ready when my number was called, and she was the truest example of that. Some takeaways I had in this one is this first game this year where it felt like the Terps just weren't locked in on the defensive end of the floor. Mason was shooting 80% at one point in the first quarter. They finished the period shooting 66.7. But there was a huge swing. There's a huge difference between that first half of defense we saw from Maryland and that second half. A drastic change between how those two between the defense, like honestly just having teeth and not really offering any resistance in that first half to the second half where they were swarming, they were on their front foot. It was a total 180 change by Maryland there to just be locked in on that third quarter, and that's what changed the game. They essentially, you see Maryland, Brendan switch defenses a lot. They came out in that third quarter, and it was kind of like a football team, honestly, just coming out to offense and going, look, it's press man, it's bump and run, and we're going to live with it. And we saw them just lock up man to man, and different defenders got stops leading to that 7-0 run, that eventually that 13-3 run we met. We saw another thing was the Kendall Walker got the start in this one, and there was a little bit of a difference too between Maryland's offense in the first and second half. We saw with Mac running the show, during her time running the show in the second half. The offense seemed a little bit more organized. And then at times, honestly, just her threat as a scorer, it feels like we've seen through this small sample size, through 7, 8 games now, that defenses react to her a little bit differently where Maryland's running their sets. So that's just something to keep an eye on. And that was something that I took away, jotted down on my notes. And Brendan would confirm that much later in, the presser when talking about, the difference between Addie and then later on, we'll get into that with, Kendall's steady progression. Lucci is another tone setter. I want to take the possibly off of that. We know what Kayleen Smikle's been. Last year we saw that. We know where Bree McDaniel has been for Maryland in terms of they are known tone setters for this team through 7, 8 games, what have you. Lucci Akanawa looks to be another tone setter. She's proved that quick. Her time here in College Park after coming over from Duke. Akanawa and Max scored 14 of Maryland's 19 in the first 5 minutes of that third quarter. Those two, when you added along with Yard and Garzon, that trio had a huge third quarter. They would score 27 of Maryland's 32 points in that period. Mac had 10 of her 12. Garzon had 9 of her 16, and Alushi had 8 of her 23 in that period. Maryland's defensive versatility was another thing in my notes. In that third quarter, we saw several different players on Walton, starting with the Lucci, and then they were just switching. Regardless of who it was, we saw Lucci on her, Poffenberger, Garzon, Walker at times. And, she got off to that electric start, and we just saw them kind of being able to use their depth a little bit and the quality of their defenders to just slow her down a bit and wear her out. She would catch her second win and get going again. But, the damage was done early in that third quarter. Also, with the defense, the points off turnovers. Maryland scored 32 points off of Mace's 21 turnovers, and a lot of that damage came in that third quarter where Maryland opened that game up. For Walton, she's a bucket. She's a wing that has a lot of ways to score the ball, and we saw that throughout this game. The Terps' ability to switch coverages seamlessly on the defensive end is another thing that impressed me. We saw them kind of tinkering and messing with things and searching for something that would work, and they found it eventually. And the fact that you're able to do that seamlessly because of your group is obviously a luxury. Mira McLean, she had some quality minutes today. Being the high-energy player that she is, her versatility allows the Terps to use her as a 4 or a 3 in small ball lineups, but it gives them when she's at the 3 in a small ball lineup, it's like having a third small ball big because the way that she attacks the glass. And then also on the perimeter, her athletic gifts allow her to be a hell of a defender, both in the post and on the perimeter. So it's just definitely a huge plus, and they continue to find ways to make the most of what she brings and, just kind of weaponize it. And that's what happened this evening, this afternoon. She finished with 8 points and 6 rebounds, also a steal. For Mason, that trio of Walton, Harris, and Moateng, they're just tough. All three, a different, the box score might not show outside of Walton's, Walton with the big number with the 27 points. But Kennedy Harris, she had 11, and Miriam Moateng had 9. But during across, we'll talk about Harris and Moateng, the buckets that they got, they were harder in buckets, and they got them with, they were just so poised. All three of them have good footwork. We saw an array of step throughs, some D cells in there. It's really impressed just from their the offensive skill sets they all have, and their ability to just put the ball in the basket. So definitely, a trio worth keeping an eye on, and why you should keep an eye on George Mason as they make their way through this season. Coach Freeze talked about Walker's progression, and she expects her to continue to do so. Expects her to get better with more experience. Walker had 5 turnovers and 4 fouls today, which is obviously the negative if you're just box score watching. But to me, she did balance it out with some really positive impact plays. She got to the line 5 times. I thought her ability to break down her defender and get into the lane kind of opened things up for Maryland offensively. And on a night when they weren't shooting the 3-ball well, we saw how dynamic Alucci was. Walker's ability to break down her man, get into the lane, get to the cup. That is a positive thing on a night when you're not shooting the ball well. Also, I thought defensively it's so easy to kind of, I don't want to say forget, but just overlook at times. We talk about the negative and the 5 turnovers and the 4 fouls, but defensively, she was on that floor. She was on the floor in the third quarter where they were kind of turning things around, deflecting passes, really getting up underneath ball handlers, and just being a pest. She is truly an irritant on that end of the floor. And again, something to keep in mind. Yeah, it's technically her second year. She's a redshirt freshman, but like Coach Freeze mentioned, I do expect her to get better as the season goes on and she gets more experience, more playing time. The overall depth they've shown throughout this point in the season. They got 26 points from their bench in this one, outscoring Mason's bench 26-12. The small ball lineups with Garzon and Poffenbarger at the 4 and 5, or tonight we saw McLean in there. Those 3 in there at the 3, 4, and 5 is a luxury and a nice weapon to deploy for Freeze. Sailor and Yarden do a good job of hitting the glass and defending both in their defense, both in the post and in space. I asked Brenda about that after the game, and she gave a great answer, but I'll just paraphrase a little bit. She went on to mention about, she gave credit to her staff for finding different ways to utilize and exploit the team's versatility. And we've seen different lineups with different pairings with those two, is the 4 and 5 at times in those small ball lineups. And, one of the things it does offensively is arguably the team's two of the team's most dangerous threats from beyond the arc. They're post players in that lineup, which means the floor is stupid cleared. I know I mentioned that after, maybe a couple of games ago where they had those 2 pair of that lineup, and there are times where they're on opposite ends of the floor. Tonight or this afternoon, we saw them, at different times run pick and pop actions with each other, which is just an added amount of stress on an opposing defense where you have to honor both of them, whether they're driving and especially the popper, because you're leaving a very capable 3-point shooter if you're slow to react to that. We also saw times, during that lineup where, they're setting screens for each other and the other one is curling off a screen to knock down a foul line jumper. Those 2 in that small ball lineup is crazy. You added Mir in there today, and to Brenda's point when she was answering, is it gives them a way throughout a game This is why it's a luxury, right? They're able to mix and match lineups to exploit other teams. Um, you can pair those three with two guards. You can go even bigger and have those three Schmeichel and a point guard. We saw at one point in time, I jotted this down in the first quarter. I think they took some folks out, and Alucci was the smallest person on the floor because they went double big for a second. And by going double big, I think it was Ozzy Mamadou, Boyko for a second, and then it was Poffenberger, Yarden, and then Alucci. Like, there's so many different ways they can mix and match this lineup, even with the injuries that they have, and eventually you get Daniel back. I truly think the versatility is going to be huge for them, and it's something they really can weaponize on both ends of the floor. So for Maryland, a quality win today. Even Coach Freeze mentioned in her post game presser that when asked about how good George Mason is, she said she expected this to be a tough game. She wasn't shocked in the least bit. And she mentioned that as time goes on, that this is going to look like a quality win for Maryland on their resume come, that time of the season when we get down to the end and it's, going to, it's time to pick team for the tournament and seeding and things of that nature before they even get to conference play, that this is going to end up being a quality win because of what she thinks of George Mason. And I would tend to agree. Like, they both played Georgetown this year. They both did end up beating Georgetown. But again, they both had a common opponent, and they both came out on top in that. So credit to George Mason. I thought that was a very great showing for them. Definitely keep an eye on them going forward for Maryland. After this, they are – let me go get this. Don't want to say the wrong thing, but with the holidays coming, they will be headed to Puerto Rico to take part in the Discover Puerto Rico Classic. So we'll keep tabs on them with that, and we'll check it back with you guys later.